You've said many times during live streams that living with your parents doesn't help you save money and that it kills your ambition. I'm 27, never lived on my own. Currently making $25 an hour, but not nearly enough to have a family by my early 30s. Not nearly enough to have a family by my early 30s. Deferge? 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 So $25 an hour, let's say you're in the US, so you're making $50,000 a year, which puts you in about the top 1/10 of 1% of the entire world's population. Man, I mean, have we lost our freaking reason altogether? Have we lost our freaking reason altogether? Do you know where there's a hugely high birth rate? Is in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's an average of 7 to 8 children. Just out of curiosity, what do you think the average wages are in, say, Haiti or sub-Saharan Africa or whatever? And how precious do you have to be to say, well, I'm only in the top 1 out of 100 people in the world, or 1 out of 1,000 people in the world in terms of income? My God, that's not nearly enough to raise a family. I mean, please, people. What are you doing? I want you to imagine opening up a time portal to your ancestors who were struggling with Saracen predations and had to move inland because they kept getting nabbed to be slaves, who had the Black Death, who had famine, who had were inducted involuntarily into a navy or yanked off to fight in the Crusades, or, you know, my gosh. And you'd say to these people, well, you see, I only have approximately infinity more money than you have. I just can't possibly afford to have any children, you see. Because why? I mean, listen, I grew up in fairly cruddy little apartments with no car. We had one old TV that you had to thump the top of, and it ripples. You're trying to watch Wimbledon was like trying to find a glass fish in an old fish tank, you know. So, and I was just talking about this with a friend of mine actually yesterday, and my daughter was at a party, and I'm good friends with the parents. So I was talking to him, and I said, you know, like many years ago, before I was even married. No, I was engaged, but I wasn't married before I had kids. I remember a guy I worked with said that parenting is just ridiculously expensive now, because everywhere you go, and this is sort of back in the day, right, more than 20 years ago, he said everywhere you go, it's $50 to $75 and a couple of hours of your time, because you got to take your kids to the movie, and if they want to see the movie, then they want their popcorn and drinks, and then if they want their popcorn and drinks, there's an arcade there, and you pay for that, and you got to drive and park, and then afterwards they might want something to eat, and you take a bunch of kids around. I remember taking my daughter and some friends of hers around for admittedly a real splurge kind of day. Like, we went to go and see one of the Minions movies. We went to an arcade. We had dinner. And yeah, it's like $200 can just vanish from your life like that. Now, you know, I'd rather have good memories than sitting on a pile of cash that I can be buried in. But he said, like, everywhere you go, you got to go to Chuck E. Cheese, and you got to buy the tickets, and you got to get the pizza, and everything. You go to a trampoline park, and it's, you know, a certain amount of dollars, and then kids want to stay, and you go laser tag, and all of this kind of stuff. Now, I personally am not a huge fan of that kind of money spending when it comes to having kids. My daughter and I, literally for, 6 or 7 years, the majority of what we did was perfectly free, in terms of, like, we had this big role-playing adventure where I talk about it in my novel, The Present. Stories, right, where she has this sort of adventure through this world of dragons and monsters and so on. And this was our biggest activity, perfectly free, just a game of sheer imagination. And I used to, we also had a phase where I would attack her with her pillow and pretend that the pillow was a sword and try and hit her, and she'd jump and dive and roll over the bed and so on. We do the couch is, you know, floor is lava kind of thing, where you try and go around the house jumping from cushion to cushion without hitting the ground. And, you know, there's lots of things that you can do that are free. And, of course, when I was a kid, you young whippersnapper. When I was a kid, I mean, no, I had no money. I had no money. I had no money. I remember it was $1.90. I wanted to go and see the movie Rocky, and it was $1.90. It was 20 cents each way on the bus and $1.50 to get in. Couldn't afford it. I mean, couldn't afford it. I remember the ice cream truck coming by. It was 5 cents to get a Choc 99, which was a vanilla cone with like half a flake chocolate bar sticking out of it. I remember once roaming around the house, I found half a penny, right? So I needed 10 times that to get one of them. I mean, I wasn't starving, although there were times when I was pretty hungry and I'd have to hang around my friend's place, crossing my fingers, hoping to get some dinner. And this is, I've sort of talked about this recently. It's a bit of a habit of overeating that you get when you grow up hungry because you're just trying to pack in for the winter, right? But my friends and I, we would go and buy dented tins of soup, and we'd go and steal someone's mom's pot, and we'd go and build a fire, and we'd cook up some beans, and we'd just sit and chat. I didn't have a bike that wasn't 7 different colors and assembled like some Franken bike from, we'd go for until I was like, I don't know, 16 or 17. We would go garbage picking and all of that. And we just had to find ways to entertain ourselves that didn't cost any money. And this idea that you just have to keep firing money at kids now, it's just wild. It's wild to me. Especially if you're homeschooling too. You don't even need a pack of lunch, right? So having grown up very poor, I mean, obviously not homeless poor, but very poor, it was a huge benefit, but creativity comes out of boredom. And, keeping kids constantly on this conveyor belt of hyperstimulation, which is expensive usually, it just, it takes away their inner life. They're constantly focused on the outside, on their chasing the stimulus like a puppy after a butterfly, and they don't ever develop any internal resources that way. So, yeah, the idea that you'd look there and say, gosh, I'm only making $50,000 a year. I can't possibly have a family. When I was growing up, our rent was, again, I know it's a different world now, but I'm just trying to figure, our rent was about $300 a month. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment at times. Then we got a 2-bedroom apartment. We had to wait on these sort of long lists. And I remember in the apartment building where I grew up in, one of them, I lived in a lot of different places, but in one of the apartment buildings was rent checks must be certified after the 5th of each month, right? Because everybody was just scrambling. And I remember I did a lot of charity work back in the day, and it was one of these ones where to raise money for the charity, you have to read a book every month, and people signed up. And then, I read a book every day or two, and then people had to, give me their pledges, and it was rough for people. People just said, I can't afford it, right? So I don't quite understand. If you make $25 an hour, it's fairly good money. Okay, can you live in a condo right downtown? You can't. So I lived in a small apartment in the suburbs. I didn't live downtown. And so you can raise a family in an apartment. You don't necessarily, I mean, if you buy on the bus or subway line, you don't need a car if you're in the city. So I don't know, man. This idea that, well, you've got to have a 4-bedroom house, and you've got to have land, and you've got to have 2 cars, and it's like, that all of that materialistic shit is just pushed on you so you don't have babies, right? You know that, right? Come on, you don't need me to tell you this, right? That all of this materialistic stuff, and you got to have this, and you got to have that, and if you don't have like somebody asked me the other day, what kind of car do you drive? Well, I'll tell you this, I drive a secondhand car, because I'm not an idiot, right? I drive a secondhand car. So, yeah, I don't know why you would need all of this money and stuff. And so that's sort of one thing that I would put forward. Adjust your expectations. The boomer economy is gone, man. It was eaten up by the endless, grandiose, hyper-selfishness of the boomer generation. So, that's gone. And so what? So you're the 2nd or 3rd wealthiest generation in the history of the world. Ooh, my gosh, what sacrifice. What a terrible, terrifying, horrible thing. Now, people had children during wartime. People had children in the middle of the Great Depression when Some places, 40% of people were out of work. I mean, if you're really, really concerned, like you just got to have, resources, then, get some land, learn how to farm, or have some livestock, and your kids can work on the farm so that they're not that expensive. Like, if you ask my daughter, and we'll do a show on this maybe one day, you ask my daughter, say, well, what are your greatest memories of childhood? Do you know what a lot of them were? A lot of them were, oh yeah, I remember that time when we put on some water shoes and we hiked up the river and we caught crayfish and frogs. And, she remembers when when our ducks were little, we used to take our ducks to a local river, and we would walk with the ducks, and the ducks loved feeding on little crayfish and so on. And she has fantastic memories. If you say, well, what about the time we went and spent X? I'm just like, yeah, that was cool. But the stuff she really vividly remembers, one of the things she loves to do, and even now, is in winter, if we can go and find a pond and clear it off, and then just run and slide the length of the pond. Like, she absolutely adores that stuff, and that's virtually free. So that's one thing that I would say is, everybody's saying, well, you need all of this material stuff in order to have kids. They're lying to you so that you don't have kids. And look, having kids is a big, awesome, deep, powerful responsibility. You literally have to keep someone alive who's kind of a death magnet until they're like 10 years old. So you got a decade of dragging them back from the abyss, right? So it's a huge, big, awesome responsibility. The possibility of heartbreak is very large, right? So you understand that people who say, well, you can't have kids making $25 an hour, they're telling you that to give you an excuse to defer finding a woman and having your kids, right? They're just telling you that so that they give you an excuse to defer that. Say, well, I'm not making enough money. I'm not making enough money. It's an excuse. Going out and finding the right woman, finding the right man, getting married, having and raising kids, is a huge responsibility. And you, me, everybody else on the planet have a bit of a habit of wanting to defer responsibility. Oh, later, like when I have enough money, when I have this, when the planets align, when I meet the right, later, as opposed to just going and making stuff happen in your life now. Just going and making stuff happen in your life now. People just later. When you make more money, when the housing prices come down, when this, when that, when the other, right? Jeez. Imagine if your ancestors had your standards, you wouldn't exist. They just wouldn't. You literally would not exist if people in the past had your standards. So that's number one. Now, number two, you're making $25 an hour, and currently, and so that's good money. You've never lived on your own, which means you should have saved a crap ton of money. You should have saved a crap ton of money because you're making good money, and you've not had to pay for housing. I assume you haven't paid much, if anything, for groceries. So clearly, you've saved a lot of money, right? Right. So let's do a little bit of math here, right? So, $25 an hour. So you've got $50,000 a year. I know you got to pay taxes, this and that and the other, right? But you should be able to save, what? Out of that $50,000, you're living at home,